Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers. Let's sit around the campfire together and talk about Dead by Daylight. Specifically about the new Dead by Daylight spin-off game, Hooked on You, a Dead by Daylight dating sim. When the 6th anniversary livestream back in May showed us the announcement trailer for Hooked on You, I don't think anyone really knew what to make of it. The game was born from a collaboration between Behaviour Interactive and Psyop, the production studio behind the KFC dating sim I Love You Colonel Sanders, released in 2019. Hooked on You came out after the Behaviour Beyond livestream on August 3rd this year. For those who aren't aware, a dating simulator is a subgenre of the visual novel, a type of game characterised mostly by blocks of dialogue to simulate interactions between the player and other characters, in which the player chooses what they say and thus influences the rest of the story. The most well-known visual novel outside of Japan is probably Ace Attorney, so if you're familiar with that game style, you'll know what you're letting yourself in for. In Hooked on You, you're dumped on the beach of the so-called Murderer's Island resort with the opportunity to court, date and ultimately bed one of 4 killers. The Trapper, the Wraith, the Huntress and the Spirit. Oh, and there's a secret route where you can date the Trickster too, but he's not really important. While this isn't the first time the dating sim subgenre has dipped into horror, Doki Doki Literature Club is a really well-known example of this. It's nevertheless remarkable that one of the biggest multiplayer games out there right now has taken the plunge. But is it any good? And what does it have to offer for fans of Dead by Daylight? Before I get going, I do just want to put out a quick spoiler warning for this game. I'll be leaving most of the actual mysteries worth solving out entirely. But there'll be details talking about events that happen in a couple of the routes that may influence your decisions when taking these routes for yourselves. I can't really avoid these and they shouldn't really matter too much, so it probably isn't a big deal, but I just want to forewarn anybody just to be sure. So let's start by talking about how dating a character works in this game. At several points in the story, you're given the choice of which killer you want to spend time with, and depending on the answers you pick in the dialogue boxes, your relationship with them will advance. You'll play minigames that function very similarly to Dead by Daylight's skill check system to help this too, and every so often you'll be given the option to switch to a different killer to romance or even relegate one out the running completely. And each killer is loosely assigned a different character archetype. Trapper is the rich and arrogant jock, Spirit is the reclusive edgy goth girl, Philip is the nerdy and self-conscious nice guy, and Huntress is the athletic and eager overachiever. Like many visual novels, you're expected to fail or not get the ending you want several times, and you're encouraged to replay the game over and over again to try out different outcomes or fix any mistakes you might have made. And with each replay, you get a more complete picture of the killers you're matchmaking with, and the strange resort on Murderer's Island where the hosts, Dwight and Claudette, are imprisoned in an endless cycle of beachside entertainment management from which neither death nor corporate dismissal are an escape. But for the most part, you could ignore the creepy existential horror of being trapped on Tropical Island Resort for all eternity, because you don't have time to watch service staff attempt to euthanize one another, you got killers to romance. And that's the first positive thing I had to say about the game. For the most part, the killers feel very authentic to their portrayals in Dead by Daylight. Well as authentic as a light-hearted dating sim will allow them to be. How they reimagined Trapper from the Jason-inspired poster boy of Dead by Daylight to the egotistical meathead and Hooked on You is the perfect example of this smooth transition. Trapper in Dead by Daylight is defined by a few key features: his raw strength and brutality, his wealth as a mine and foundry owner, and his role as the right-hand man of his father Archie, who manipulated and abused Evan into servitude. These features are all transplanted into Hooked on You and given a heavy varnish of black comedy and sex appeal that turn this slab of grease and muscle into a potential partner. His work overalls are switched out for an old-timey bathing suit that reflect both his traditionalist old money background and hang off his massive shoulders just like his classic overalls. His brawn is exaggerated into the ripped physique of a JoJo character, and his family's money is spent on a private yacht to flex his wealth and privilege. It's goofy and silly, but it's still Trapper, because these key features we associate with him are still present, albeit in different forms. And it means people coming to the game because they like Trapper in Dead by Daylight are unlikely to be disappointed by how he's portrayed in Hooked on You. The same goes for Wraith, whose quiet, reflective and industrious nature in Dead by Daylight is mirrored in him keeping himself to himself for the most part, and needing the player to coax him out of his shell a little bit while he tries to figure out how to escape the island. Huntress, I'd argue, gets the best glow up of all the killers in the transition to Hooked on You, with basically every character trait she has in Dead by Daylight not just maintained, but significantly expanded upon as the player gets to know her. Her need for a family, that results in her continuously kidnapping children in her original lore, is a big part of her relationship criteria in Hooked on You, and how you treat that need is one of the big ways your relationship with her can develop. The only killer who I think gets seriously screwed over in the transition is Spirit, and oh boy, it's bad. Huntress gets her need of family transported over into Hooked on You, Evan gets his domineering father, Philip gets his reclusive and studious nature, and Rin gets a foot fetish. I wish I was joking, but there's not one but two mini-games dedicated to rubbing suntan lotion on specifically her feet. One of which is the foreplay scene before you have sex with her, where she gets very excited about what you're doing with that lotion. Like, it's an intensely weird thing to add to her, it really comes out of nowhere.
Burn it. It's the worst thing ever!
And there's a plotline in Her Route where it turns out she's been fucking Evan, which by itself is weird enough because he's like 20 years older than her. But then when Kazan turns up, the narrator makes a point of how much like Evan he is, implying that Rin has an Electra complex for her grandfather, or at least her grandfather figure. Again, what does this actually add in a positive way that isn't just weird and creepy? It feels like the people at PSYOP, who were the ones who wrote this dialogue in the first place, took the only conventionally attractive character to typical straight gamer men and projected all of their fetishes onto her. At one point she even refers to herself as an anime waifu. And I don't know about you, but as soon as I read that, I felt all my internal organs shut down at the same time, because at that exact moment my body decided living just wasn't worth the effort anymore. Compare this to how well the other killers got treated, and it's pretty clear Rin got the short end of the stick. But honestly, the game's treatment of Rin really isn't my biggest issue with Hooked on You, because that can be ignored. If you really like Rin, or just her feet, this might be a refreshing take on her that you might enjoy. Or you can just avoid her route altogether and you won't really care that much. What you can't ignore so easily is the humour. Or more accurately, the chronic addiction this game's writers have to self-aware meta-humour. Don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating that the Dead by Daylight dating sim takes itself seriously, absolutely not. I have no issue with the presence of humour. I'm taking issue with the kind of humour this game seems to love to fall back on for no real reason whatsoever. It feels like every 10 seconds there's some sort of quip by the narrator or one of the characters taking a jab at the fourth wall, acknowledging they're in a game or that Dead by Daylight exists separately. And it typically comes in the form of overly long punchlines that more or less boil down to the game pointing at itself, laughing, and expecting you to laugh too. Sometimes this style of humour absolutely works in the game's favour, like the references to IP Island, which is the island where all the licensed killers Dead by Daylight has collaborated with over the years go to party without any of the threat of legal repercussions. It's a clever little nod to one of Dead by Daylight's most famous traits, its acquisition of licensed characters, and it comes back a few times as the location of one of Trickster's stages and the source of a cameo appearance by Ghostface. Like, that's self-referential humour done correctly, but gets set up and paid off in a way that could only be done in a work like Hooked on You, adapted from a work like Dead by Daylight. But for every IP Island joke, there's a long drab of a joke, with a punchline drier than Ben Shapiro's wife, that just makes you want to skip through the dialogue boxes. Which is a real problem when your game is like 90% dialogue boxes. And skipping through several of them to dig through a joke that isn't funny could mean you miss out on vital information that screws up your route. These jokes just feel like too much of a good thing that detract from your immersion into these characters you're supposed to be romancing. These characters that almost certainly drew you to buy and play the game in the first place. And the game has so much good humour to work with already. There are some absolutely golden exchanges between characters that don't need any fourth wall shenanigans to be really funny. This here was my actual live reaction to probably my favourite line in the whole game. The rats have started to union up. I'm sorry, that's actually really funny. That's really fucking funny. Like, I'm sorry. This is brilliant. I love this game. Between organically funny characters having dialogue with each other and the massive amounts of black comedy that you'd expect, merging a horror game with a dating sim, Hooked on You is a very, very funny game without any obviously self-aware jokes whatsoever. You could cut a good 70-80% of them and just keep the really good ones in, like the aforementioned IP Island, and you'd have a much more consistent tone. Better immersion in the conversation between you and your dates, and the freed up dialogue boxes mean you'd have more room to develop them too and tell jokes that are actually funny. Everybody wins that way. I think this chronic over-reliance on self-aware jokes comes from how PSYOP, and to some extent Behaviour themselves, viewed this project. I think PSYOP viewed Hooked on You not as a Dead by Daylight dating sim, but as a spoof of dating sims, using Dead by Daylight characters. And to show you what I mean, I want to show you the last dating sim project PSYOP worked on. The KFC dating sim I Love You, Colonel Sanders. The game features a wholly original cast of characters, including a heavily fictionalised version of KFC's famous Colonel Harlan David Sanders. The whole thing was a branding move by KFC as part of their attempt to create their lasting image of the Colonel, separate from the real man who died in 1980. Much like Hooked on You, I Love You, Colonel Sanders based its comedy around self-referential meta-humour as PSYOP poked fun at the absurdity of the product they were making. A lot of reviewers didn't care for this style at all, such as Geeta Jackson, who wrote the following in her review of the game for Kotaku. Colonel Sanders might be intended as an affectionate parody of dating sims, but try as I might, I'm not actually sure it's parodying any dating sim I've ever played. I think the game would have been stronger if it had gotten a little more specific. Dating sims are silly. They're melodramatic soap operas, and often formulaic. Why not throw in a contrived meet cute, like so many of the dating sims I've played? Instead, I Love You, Colonel Sanders gestures at the overarching concept of dating sims before ushering the player on to the next illustration of KFC products. I came away from I Love You, Colonel Sanders confused more than anything. It's not actively hostile to the genre, but it also doesn't take the genre seriously enough to be funny to fans of it. If any of these criticisms by Jackson sound familiar, good, you're paying attention. Don't get me wrong, Hooked on You is a far better product than I Love You, Colonel Sanders, in large part because they're basing the game off a group of beloved characters in one of the biggest multiplayer games in the world, not an old man stamped on the side of a bucket of fried chicken. But I can see Jackson's criticism of PSYOP's earlier game having some bearing on this one. It doesn't take the concept of the dating sim seriously enough for its self-aware jokes to work, which makes the game feel like it hates itself for being a dating sim, and wants to poke fun at itself simply to have something to poke fun at. This isn't that much of a problem on your first route, but it gets really irritating on repeat playthroughs, which you'll want to do to get all the endings. A problem the chicken game never had because it only had one good ending. And it's the biggest obstacle to enjoying this game in my opinion. If you can bear the endless tide of mediocre at best self-aware quips to make it feel like the game is judging you for playing it, there's genuinely a lot to love about Hooked on You. Yes, the comedy can fall flat. Yes, the survivor sprites look like freeze-dried anime characters. Yes, Rin Yamaoka has been written by someone whose only contact with a woman in the past 10 years has been with his extremely sticky Kill la Kill body pillow. But if you can look past all that, you're in for a good time. I love the routes I've played through, even spirits at many points, and I want to keep going to try and get all the endings, even the hidden trickster one. And I suspect we're likely to get more routes and more killers in the coming months. So maybe when Hillbilly, Hag, Deathslinger, Twins, or even Ghostface get added to the game, PSYOP will ditch the self-aware bullshit and just stick to writing these killers as the fun and endearing characters they all have the potential to be. characters that we in the Dead by Daylight community have already grown to know and love long before their arrival at Murderer's Island. Oh yeah, one more thing. All these criticisms I've made about Hooked on You's writing, suffice to say I can make all this bad press go away. Just add Carmina and Adiris to the game and I'll keep my mouth shut. My price is simple but non-negotiable. So guys, keep that in mind for the future. So what did you guys think? Are you going to be picking up Hooked on You? Have you done so already? If you've played it, do you agree with my criticisms, or do you think I'm taking it all a bit too seriously? Either way, I'd love to hear what you think. The lore video about Jonah's Tome that I was working on has had to be put on hold because Project W is coming, and I'm working on some content for that because the PTB is coming probably the next week or two. To make sure you don't miss Weskin time, please do subscribe if you're new to the channel. And you can check my links in the description for my Twitch, my Twitter, my Discord, and my Patreon if you feel like my content is worth your money. Patrons have already seen my videos a day early, so if you want early access or some of the other sweet perks, you can by all means go and check it out. It would mean the world to me. And while you're down there, there's also a link to Wraith Energy, long-term partners of the channel and generally good people. They make high quality and tasty energy drinks, sugar-free without the crash, and you can get 20% off your order by using code PIX20 at checkout, so by all means take a look. So that's all I have to say, and I'll see... Wait, hang on a second. What's this? Wait a second.